Hivin and Vibin with Dr. Beebe.
Folks, how have you all been? And here I am back with Melanie Fox, and this is Hivin and Vibin with Dr. Beebe, and the program that we are doing today is on how do you lead, how do you coach? I'm sorry, how do you coach? I was going to say how do you lead, but this is the how do you coach program, and this is amazing because Melanie is a super coach, and that too in a very, very specific area. She is a speech coach. Can you believe it? Fine. So, what does Melanie do? Melanie empowers executives and public figures to speak clearly and confidently in English through accent reduction, interview, and presentation training. She also trains actors to master authentic English and Spanish dialects. She's also a paid public speaker who helps her audience hack into language and host of a new podcast, Hack That Accent. Through her brand, SpeechFox, Melanie helps non native English speakers articulate clear business English and also empowers performers to master dialects from around the world. Melanie has coached speech and pronunciation for 20 plus years and holds a Master's of Science degree in linguistics from Georgetown University and Bachelor of Science degree in linguistics and Spanish from the same university. She also honed her craft in business presentation and executive leadership roles in the corporate education space as she trained and led successful sales, marketing, and client service teams. She works with athletes, doctors, or medical professionals and prepares her clients for pitch competitions. SpeechFox is a women business enterprise, a small business enterprise, and also a disability owned business enterprise. Whoa, that's a lot of work that you have been doing, Melanie, and welcome to Hivin and Vibin with Dr. Baby.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beebe. It's so exciting to be here.
I am excited too because you are the first speech coach that I have got in my series of how do you coach. So, with this, the first question that comes to my mind is how did you get the name speech coach, speech fox?
Well, I'm going to say I'm a very literal person. So, my last name is Fox. I thought this is sort of my brand naturally. I think foxes are clever and cunning, and I thought Fox needs to be part of my business. What do? I'm a speech coach. So I literally took the speech from Speech Coach and Fox from Melanie Fox, put them together, checked GoDaddy, it was available, and there Speech Fox was born.
Lovely. I think you're a lot more than just a fox's attributes that you have said. I would find you more, when I first met you, I found you, the first thing that radiates is your warmth. You're
Oh, thank you.
extremely warm, and that comes through very, very clearly. So now I think I've met you now for some years. It's not just a few months. We have met for a few years now, and it's
Yeah.
amazing because I I don't feel, as if we have met virtually or something. I feel that there is a connection which is lovely to have.
Yes, I feel like you're my long distance friend and networking colleague and partner that I could refer to or invite into any organization with total confidence. So I also
Thank you.
think that right off the bat, your smile, your authenticity, you're just like a genuine positive spirit. And I really enjoyed meeting with you. So maybe that's why I seem to have hoarded you into my world.
Thank you. So, Melanie, the next question that comes is why did you choose Spanish?
In high school, no, I'm going to correct myself. In middle school, we were given the option to pick a world language, and our options were Spanish, French, Italian, and German. And I picked Spanish because I thought I'd have the most access to practice it and to use it here in the US, even if I didn't travel. And world population wise, Spanish is, a more, a higher level of spoke. Is that English? I need to take my own speech coaching. There's a bigger population of Spanish speakers than the other languages that we were given a choice to learn. But I will say later on, I did wind up taking a little bit of French. I took Italian as my last year in college and audited a year. And during the pandemic, my husband and I took German together. So I was not letting those other three languages go. But I thought that it would be the most practical and sort of accessible for me to choose Spanish. And even, Spanish language television was available those years where the others were not. So I thought I'd get my hands on Spanish more. And I loved how it sounded, but I loved the idea of all four languages. But yes, Spanish to me was a practical choice that I could use and potentially be handy in business as well.
And is there any childhood connection with Spanish?
Not with Spanish, but with Cantonese.
Okay.
So when I was a little girl, my best friend in the first grade was Ada Young, and Ada had moved with her family from China, and I was really her first American friend that used to come over her house. And when I would come over, I was just totally enamored with the difference in culture and language in her household. So when we got into her house, they had slippers, and then I would taste her mom's various delicious Chinese home cooking. And then I would hear a language that I didn't recognize in the house, which was Cantonese, a language popular in Hong Kong. And I was so taken with the language, I just wanted to keep hearing it and figuring out what are they saying? What is how do you speak two languages? This was like very exciting to me and something that I hadn't experienced before. And one of the things that I got extra excited about was that her parents really didn't speak much English, and they were a bit reluctant to speak English in front of other folks. But I was just a tiny little 6-year-old, so excited. So of course they spoke English with me. And I noticed that Ada and her younger brother would make fun of their parents because as an adult, when you come to another country, you can't just learn the language overnight. Whereas comparatively, a child will quickly pick up that language as a first language. And an adult will pick it up as a second language. And by second, I don't mean the second in order. I mean there are native languages, and everything else is known as a second language in linguistics, regardless if it's second, third, fourth, fifth. It doesn't matter what number it is in line. It just matters that you learned it after the critical period, where sort of in adolescence, your brain chemistry and things change, so you don't absorb the language the same way. So you could have 5 first languages and 5 second languages, but by second, again, I mean you learned it as an adult, not as your native language. And you always have sort of a doubt that remains in your brain when it is not your first or native language. So again, just describing the nuances of calling it a second language. But anyway, so her parents spoke English as a second language and were beginner in their level. And so I noticed that when her mom would speak English, the son and daughter would, correct and make fun of the parents. And her mom seemed very interested in really perfecting more of the language so she could get out there and use it. So I used to sit with her mom, Helen Young, and I would go over words with her. So she would say a word, and then I would pronounce it and show her what my mouth was doing. And then if she had markers or pens and paper, I would phonetically, in my 6-year-old way, write out what are the phonetics of this particular word. Because English words, even though they use a phonic type of spelling, it's not the most straightforward. And then there are combinations of things like CL, which makes out of a KL sound, like in the word clown. And I remember it was hard for her to put the K and L sound together. It would come out like clown, or even once it came out as knout. And so I remember showing her what my mouth does for the cluster, the blend of those two sounds, I would show her what's the difference between an L and an N. So we would really practice together, and it was very hands-on, and I just adored teaching English. And in return, because they knew I was so excited about hearing Cantonese, they'd give me little post-its with Cantonese kind of transliterated on it, because the symbols wouldn't help me practice. So they sort of wrote it in, again, sort of a phonetic style, and with little notes on what the melody, because it's a tonal language, English doesn't have tones, Cantonese has at least 6, depending who you ask. I've heard 6, 9, and 10. But the book I had at the time and the native speakers telling me they felt 6 tones. So I would practice my words and my tones, and I would come back the next time I saw them and have mastered some words. And then I moved away. I was in Staten Island, and I had moved to Long Island, to Comac. And so I wouldn't see my friend or her family for the school year, but in the summer we'd visit each other. And my surprise was my parents had bought me a book at Barnes and Noble's, a book with cassette tapes of colloquial Cantonese, narrated by folks from England. And so I would memorize phrases or conversations, and then I'd come back and tell them my conversation, like I'd sell mangoes to myself. And so they just thought this was hysterical. And I thought this was the most fun activity I could imagine, teaching myself Cantonese from cassette tapes in a book. There were no apps or software out there at the time. Rosetta Stone didn't exist. Mango Languages didn't exist. Duolingo didn't exist. Babbel, all of those things. They weren't on the market yet. We were way behind. We didn't even have Microsoft Encarta yet for those folks who are in their 40s or older. But I just thought this language teaching and learning thing is the most fun thing I could imagine. And then using it on people, not knowing what you rehearsed and then coming and saying something that they understood. I just thought this was the best. This was the most fun activity ever. This was my sport. So that's how I got into language teaching and language learning all at the same time before even getting to Spanish in middle school.
Fantastic. What I find is that you actually had a passion for words and language, and you have actually gone ahead and followed your passion, which is amazing because there are so few people who actually follow their passion. Choose. Yes.
Yes, I was going to say it wasn't the straightest of lines in my journey to being a speech coach full time, but it was always in the mix. So when I graduated with my master's in linguistics, I thought, okay, this is great. I did a 5-year program. I got my bachelor's, my master's. I studied abroad in there. I got all of the learning that I need for a while. Maybe I'll get my PhD one day, but I need some real world experience. And when I left Georgetown with this master's degree, the same professors that had encouraged me to go into this computational linguistics 5-year master's program said, what are you going to do with just your master's? And I said, what? Are you serious? Like, I thought this was my career move. And they said, well, you're not going to stay for your PhD? I said, well, hopefully I'll come back later after I make enough money to pay for this college endeavor that I just did for the master's degree. So what happened at the end of the day is that I did leave with my 2 degrees. And I just set out to work. I said, you know what? I think linguistics is super practical. It's a science of language. I also learned how it applies to technology. I'm going to get a job at one of these wonderful .com companies that's emailing me. They all crashed on my way out of college. The URLs were, I was emailing people and it said that domain is no longer found kind of thing. So this was problematic. So I just applied to every job I could find, and I found my path 2 ways almost simultaneously. I taught adult English language learners at night. So it was an adult ESL program in Huntington on Long Island through a Patchogue Medford program. These were kind of grant-funded programs for adults, for adult literacy. And I taught adult ESL, and every now and then I got to sub for Spanish GED, which I also thought was a great subject to teach. And right after I got that job, an educational software company, a SaaS company, software as a service company, hired me because of my new ESL teaching focus. And when I went in person for my interview to write questions for adult ESL subject matter, I got so excited about what was going on in the business, and I asked questions, and I I said, well, what, are there other things that I can do for you? And, in the business. And the boss said, well, can you answer phones? I said, sure. He said, could you do tech support? I said, I will gladly learn tech support. I'm great at describing, fixes to people for their computers, or their, people who are not getting anywhere with their error messages, or they can't get something to work. I'm always good at solving problems and MacGyvering things. So the boss said, yeah, we could teach you tech support. And then I guess I just seemed so excited about helping. The guy said, you know what, I know you were here for a sort of a part-time consultant thing, but why don't I just give you a full-time job? I said, great, I'll take it. So at the time, I was working several part-time jobs, with my adult ESL being my favorite. And so I kept my English language learners position, and I added a full-time job in what turned out to be the tech support, turned into customer service, turned into sales, and sales turned into marketing. So I wound up really being a major player in that company. I was sort of the right-hand person of the boss when it came to anything other than coding, right? I wasn't doing making the software, and I wasn't doing sort of the payroll, but everything else sort of fell under my bucket. So I learned really quickly how to develop rapport on the phone, in person, whether it was sales, whether it was account services and maintaining relationships with clients, or even picking up the phone and doing the tech support. So I did a lot of conferences, a lot of presenting, a lot of public speaking, and a lot of writing for the marketing side of things. And this sort of I guess it was all hands on deck, but my hands. I was sort of a utility player for this company. That really seeded my career doing sales, marketing, and client services for software companies, and eventually I narrowed that to language education companies, like usually with a software component. And so that was part of my career, and that career really shaped the way that I nowadays teach a lot of the public speaking, salesmanship, and pitching, delivering some short messages at conferences, for example, if you're running a booth, and anything that has to do with public facing or client facing communications, PowerPoint decks. Eventually Zoom meetings became part of this, or Teams meetings, any kind of webinar. And so this is the sort of street cred of 20 plus years in this type of role, which led to leadership and a lot of player coach roles. On the other hand, I was teaching English language learners for about 3.5 years for the school district I mentioned. And then when I moved to the city for my other job, my full-time job that paid the bills and my college loans off, I missed my teaching when I didn't do it for a few months. So I started Speech Fox then and there and said, okay, I see my niche. I love teaching English language learners, but I see a hole in the education market. And it's not the beginners that has the big gap. It's for the advanced speakers. It's for the speakers who already studied, they have the vocabulary they need, they do business in English, they think and dream and socialize in English, but nobody's helping these folks after they plateau in their speaking, their sort of verbal skills. They understand. So if they were to take a test, their reading comprehension, their listening comprehension, their writing would all be pretty stellar. But when it comes to spoken English, the clarity of the accent, the confidence that they have when they speak, and therefore how much authenticity they can bring because they're so worried about their grammar, their construction, but moreover, more than anything, their sound. And so I said, when it comes to the sound of your speech, if this is getting in your way, I can help you sound clearer so that you could feel more confident, and then bring out all of your true authenticity when you stop worrying about all of the what you think of as errors or mistakes. We're going to make those feel like they take a back seat because A, you conquered a lot of the sound systems. B, you're confident in the way that you're constructing your message, and that confidence will carry over to you as a whole, as a brand, and as a being that just wants to express themselves. So that's the idea of the speech coaching that I do now. And I still work with beginners at times, but most of my clients are in that gap where they have plateaued, they've become frustrated, and I work with people whose success depends on how well they speak. And that could be a direct connection, top level, like this is I don't know, a public figure, a social media influencer, could be someone who is the head of or a C-level at a company and they're the face of the company, someone who has their own business. Or it could be someone who is moving up, right? HR may have identified this person as a high potential, or maybe they're in sales, or maybe they're a global startup pitching their company and they need investments. So that was a long way to answer your question, but it wasn't the most direct path to I graduated with my master's and here is my business. It was let me work as much as I can. And the two things that came out of my work were helping non-native English speakers and then helping any speaker, native or non-native, with the way that they succeed using their speech.
Lovely. So what you're actually saying, using your speech would also mean articulation?
Yes. So the way that they articulate sounds, it could be the way that they present in front of an audience. It could be the way that you do a networking pitch in 30 seconds in a room or on a Zoom or on a Teams meeting. So any way that speech affects your success all falls into how I help people. That it could and speech helping you can even be you're going on a job interview and your backdrop and lighting is not highlighting you. I always joke that I have a hallway to a bathroom behind me and it will reveal what this looks like. And so I was joking with Dr. Beebe prior to the podcast that I have to let my husband know that I'm on a podcast, otherwise he may make a lot of noise. And so there are things that you can do for yourself as a speaker to make sure that nothing interferes with the way that you sound, or as little interferes, and now it's up to you to make your message heard.
So how did you start? I hear that you started working with the corporates, the C-suite levels, and the other people up, high potentials who were growing in their career, etc. How did you start working with athletes or a specific profession like athletes or medical professionals?
This is very interesting. So when it came to athletes, I noticed that, and I always have something handy on my desk, that athletes didn't necessarily own the mic when it came their way. And my favorite sport is MMA, and UFC is my favorite thing to watch on television. So the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And I noticed that non-native athletes often use an interpreter, and the interpreters are great. But what happens is you get the fighter just had a spectacular knockout, and then someone like Joe Rogan comes into the ring with a microphone. The crowd is going crazy. They ask the athlete a question, but then instead of going to the athlete, it goes to the interpreter who repeats the content of the question in the language, then the fighter saying the content in the native language, and then the interpreter finally delivering the message to the audience and to the interviewer, like Joe Rogan. And so the amount of time that it takes to have all of those transactions going on really puts a damper on the audience's excitement. The other thing is the fighter, being very excited, does not actually get to deliver their own message. So what can either happen is you've got a very excited interpreter who's doing a great job of delivering that that giant spirited answer, but the eyeballs are on the interpreter at that point. Or the interpreter gives a subdued version of it, and then maybe the audience isn't as excited just because the delivery is not the same. So what I wanted to do right off the bat is work with athletes that had big personalities and English was just the barrier. So I thought, even if the interpreter is in there, and interpreters are wonderful, so this is not a knock on interpreters, if the interpreter could make sure that the fighter understood the message, but then have the fighter deliver at least the beginning of the answer, then the audience could really be excited about them. The potential sponsors that could give those fighters endorsements could know, okay, this person speaks English at least enough to, if I give them some lines, they can repeat some things on television or, on streaming media, to promote my product. And the fans get into it. They can now get more followers on social media. They could even do some podcasting in English. Again, it could be a mix. They could use English and the interpreter, but as long as they're getting some English out themselves, it gives them a huge, huge advantage and opportunity. And at the end of the day, when it comes to UFC fighting, or when it comes to MMA and specifically the UFC, they need to sell tickets. So if you're not an exciting fighter to the audience based on your profile, based on your followers, the amount of people that really want to get you back in that ring, maybe you could even create a beef with another fighter if you speak English and antagonize them, and then there's tension and it rises, and then the fans really want to see that fight. These are things you can do to promote yourself, and without English, it's much harder for the fighters to gain that kind of traction. And there's a great example that I like to use. There is a fighter, Chael Sonnen, an English-speaking fighter who used to antagonize fighters so much with his post-fight speeches and the things he used to say, in the media, that he would get these incredible fights. He would jump the line. It's not like the number one contender always fights the champion. They pick the fight. As they should, to sell tickets and to get people's eyeballs. If they don't make sales, they're not going to continue to be a successful business. So Chael Sonnen would use his sharp tongue and his image as a bully to pick on other fighters and get these wonderful fights. And there were other fighters, for example, a few from Dagestan, that didn't speak a lot of English, were very quiet after fights. And there was a guy, Magomed Ankalaev, who had to win 10 fights in a row to get his title fight. He could not be denied at that point because he, what they call, cleared out the division. But if you could just own that mic, right on the spot in English and just get some sound bites out to get the audience into it, that is really how you can make money in your career. And it's not just in MMA and UFC fighting. It's in any sport. You can get eyeballs on you and media. And then after your career or during your career, you can get opportunities to do paid public speaking. You can get opportunities to be a commentator. And it just opens a lot of doors. And I was speaking with someone the other day who's a very brilliant woman who helps athletes from other countries save and generate their income, grow their income, using prudent financial advisory strategies. She said, without English, you're leaving money on the table. And so that's exactly the feel. And that's why I work with one of my favorite athletes to work with is Melky Costa. I made him this hat that says "Own the Mic" in English with SpeechFox. And so I was so proud that he wore this on his Instagram. Now I will have hat hair. That was very brilliant of me. But excuse me while I fix my. I said something about making an impression on Zoom and Teams. Yeah, this is not my most strategic move. But anyway, the idea is, if I can help my athletes, my fighters, speak English right into the mic and grab attention, that is a really powerful move and a really strategic move. So that's how I work with athletes. I think you mentioned the doctors. There's a different scenario there, but let me pause because that was a lot of talking for me.
Yeah, so you actually picked up, that was a very, very good gap that you actually found for yourself, and you were able to position yourself in a very, very perfect manner. And I was an interpreter at one time. When I was a student, I used to work as an interpreter too. So I used to do English Hindi and English Bengali. So when I did that, I agree with you that what happens with interpreters, but I used to work mostly with the medical professionals. I used to go to hospitals, and I actually specialized working with psychologists. So I used to do a lot of work with psychologists. And one of the things that the doctors told me was one day, out of the blue, he was a very senior, very, very senior doctor. And he turned around and he said, you're a very, very different kind of of an interpreter. You are so casual. You make things so informal, which is so different from other interpreters who are very, very poker faced, and and they just deliver the language without the feel or the tone and things like that. And I totally agree with you. So when that happens, the focus actually moves to the interpreter, and the
Yes.
interpreter who's supposed to be in the background comes forward, and is not the speaker, who's actually the speaker, is left behind.
Yes.
I can totally understand what you're trying to say, but I'm fantastically, I've how do I put it? I'm just looking from the business perspective. I find it amazing that you found this gap and you positioned yourself. No wonder you're helping your clients with pitch competitions, because you would definitely be able to help them, with understanding where the gap is and how to push their portfolio through that. But let's now
Yeah.
talk about the medical professionals and how did you start working with them?
Sure. And if I may, just before we move, I want to shout out another client of mine from the UFC. He's a retired fighter named Clifford Starks, and he is a native English speaker, very, very eloquent. And because he's working on things, we're each other's coaches, and he's a brilliant coach in the championship mindset. And he has sort of the opposite problem, or opposite challenge, I should say, as Melky Costa, who is a Brazilian fighter learning English from scratch. Clifford is using his knowledge from his leadership experience and his fighting experience to help leaders. And what he needs is corporate speaking, positioning assistance to make his brand even clearer, and to work on things like PowerPoint decks and and keynote speeches. So you can be a fighter that has limited or no English and rise up that way, or a fighter that is perfectly native in English, but just using your sound bites better, and getting your message across to audiences as clearly and powerfully as possible, using other methods, not just in person, but Zoom, slide decks, and things like that that you may not have a lot of experience in if you're coming from the athletic world. So that is a perfect segue to, you said, did you say the medical world? So in the medical field, or pitch competitions. Sorry, which one did you say?
No. Let's talk about the medical professionals
brought
first,
both.
and how did you get to work with them?
Yes, I was going to say you brought both up. So historically, my audience is more of an HR global corporation audience, where people in companies need to sound clear, feel confident, and be authentic when they present to clients and internal stakeholders and all of the above. But when it comes to the medical field, I had quite a few clients hire me because they felt that they weren't clear enough in their pronunciation, or maybe even the delivery of their message to their patients. And they really cared about their patients so much that they wanted me to help them with their English pronunciation, and also some, I'd say, conversational style English, to make sure they're saying things in a way that would sound easy to understand and not such medical jargon to their patients. So that's the first way I started working with doctors. Then one day I got a call from a hotel saying that they had a native speaker there who wanted speech help because he was about to be an expert witness on trial. And he was a urologist giving testimony, or giving expert witness testimony to bolster a case for the defendant, who is a doctor. And if I may say, one of the things he said in his in the practice that we were doing, he said, usually after this operation, you'll be peeing like a teenager. And I said, wait, let me stop you there. I have a dad that had some prostate issues, so I know what you mean. But I bet you that most of the jurors, unless they're middle-aged men or older, they're not going to know what that means. So you have to understand the shared knowledge and explain to them what, peeing like a teenager could be, I don't know, a young college boy who drank too much and peed on the side of a building. I wouldn't necessarily know what that means. So I tried to get him to say, put yourself in the mind of, let's say, a 23-year-old female who's on the jury. What would she know? What would you need to explain to her in order for her to get that? Even though you're not using jargon that seems medical, you're relying on shared knowledge. So that was the first time I got called in to prep an expert witness. But about 5 folks last year in the same year contacted me with the same issue. They said, I have a doctor who's about to take the stand. His English or her English or their English is not clear. And I'm afraid that the jurors are not going to respond well to this sound. And so I'd like you to come in and help this doctor that's going to, be on the stand in their own defense. So at various times and stages in the court case, that is where my involvement started. So, for example, one of the cases, the doctor was going to be on the stand the next day. So I went into the office with the lawyer who is doing a mock version of the cross-examination. So you've got, as a doctor, you've got a lot to contend with, right? First, you're on trial defending yourself, which is very nerve-wracking. You've got the other side, right? The prosecutor is going to come at you with statements that are potentially untrue or misleading, and is kind of barking them potentially in your face, and you have to defend yourself against something that is very naturally uncomfortable. You've got jurors watching and judging you, and their service is to make a fairly snap judgment about something that they're not very knowledgeable about, a person they're not very knowledgeable about, on a subject matter that they're definitely not experts in. And they have to draw conclusions in a short period of time while watching this spectacle take place. And you've got medical jargon to overcome, because again, you may speak in a way that's very scientific and that other doctors would understand, but now you've got, again, the lawyer and jurors, and a judge, none of whom likely went to medical school. So you've got jargon and explaining things to overcome. And then finally, you've got an accent that doesn't sound like the juror's accent. And so the issues that the accent disparity can cause would be, first, that the jurors hear your accent and actually misunderstand what you said. That's probably the worst case scenario, that they misunderstood a word for a different word, and now they've got the wrong understanding of what you just said. Another is that they're straining to understand you. So every time you speak, they're sort of trying to understand the words, but not following you fully because they're struggling to understand. And then third, if any of the first two are true, those jurors could wittingly or unwittingly make again, maybe you could call it a subconscious or unconscious judgment based on bias, right? They could think, oh, well, this person's hard to understand. I bet the patient didn't understand them either, so they didn't get the right information, and then use that against you. Or they could say, where did this person get their degree? I don't trust this person. I don't know what country they got their medical degree from, or maybe that country doesn't have as good medical schooling. And these are unfair things, but the jurors may not even realize they're thinking this, or they might. And either way, they're deciding if you're liable or not. So the lawyers bring me in to work with the doctors, and the health liability insurance reimburses them. So everybody wins if I come in, and I don't mean that they must win the case. Often they do and thank me for it, which is why I have some fabulous testimonials on my website. But there's a much better chance that if the doctor can speak clearly and make good choices with the words they use, either because they're words that they can pronounce, words that the jury can understand easily, even the way that if someone says, well, where did you get your degree? I had a client that most recently went to Columbia University in New York City, where they were being tried. So if you said, well, I most recently studied at Columbia, and then prior to that, and then list it, the first impression they have is, oh, that's an Ivy League school here. If you mention a school with a name that they can't understand or pronounce in a country that they've never been to as the first thing you say, that may actually make a negative impression on the jurors. And again, not fair. It's not a fair thing, but it's an unfortunate truth in life.
It's an unconscious bias.
It's an unconscious bias, and again, it's an unfortunate reality that the doctors are facing, whether it's fair or not. That's how juries work, and even judges may not realize that they're making judgments. And again, if it's something that you can rehearse and prevent, and even just make that doctor feel more prepared and more confident going in and have their whole mindset like, I'm ready for this. And when I say these things, everybody will understand. English or non-native English, both, it can impact the doctor, whether English is their first language or not, because you feel readier that I know what I'm going to say. It's going to be clear. The jurors will understand it, and they will be able to see that I am not liable. So that's how the medical malpractice and work with doctors and hospitals has blossomed in the last several years, and it's a
Fantastic.
wonderful.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna say it's wonderful to work on those projects, and they're fast paced. They're very very technical, and they're I like to say at the vortex of a lot of things that I do, and that probably leads us to the next one about the global pitches.
Yeah. So
So,
I was actually going to ask you before we talk about the global pitches, I wanted to understand, uh, you have been working on speech and linguistics, and I can also hear articulation, a lot of work on articulation, but you're
yes,
also psychologically working with them because you're helping them, conquer unconscious bias. That's what I'm hearing. You're helping them conquer what other people might think of them well ahead of time and preparing them for it. So you're actually addressing unconscious bias. What are your guiding principles that actually made you be who you are as a coach?
my my guiding principles are, let's see, I want to think about this before I answer. I love helping. I know that people will say, oh, when you talk about what you do, don't say I help people, I help. But since I'm a kid, I love helping. If you have a challenge and I can help, I love problem solving, and I love making somebody's day a little brighter. So I think my guiding principles for what I do is, if I can help, I want to do it. Two, if I can make someone feel better about themselves, or about their work product, I want to do it. If I can encourage somebody to be more authentic and let more of themselves out so they can have more fun, I want to be part of it. And at the end of the day, my love of language needs to be part, language and communication and human connection needs to be part of what I'm doing. So that's how I would sort of sum up the helping, the being yourself, and using language to do it as three of my principles.
Fantastic. And how did you learn to sustain your energy?
So maybe that's a loaded question. I don't drink coffee. I wake up like this every day. I I I think I just love what I do so much that it just I wake up thinking about it, I go to bed thinking about it, and it's one of those, if you do what you love, you won't work a day in your life kind of things. I'm just intrinsically motivated. There was a time that I was in the hospital where my legs stopped coordinating, so I couldn't walk, and the right side of my face was frozen. It was paralyzed, and I was on IV. In my right hand, of course, because they don't ask sometimes in the hospital, which is your dominant hand. They just stick where they see a vein. And so I was kind of really laid up, with my face on this, my mouth speaking on one side of my face, my legs with the, I don't know what you call those lovely devices that try to get circulation in them, and an IV in my arm. And I could not let people with inquiries just go into my voicemail and sit there, or go into my email. I use my non-dominant hand, made phone calls, emailed. I mean, this is probably a crazy person speaking right now, but I love what I do so much. I, of course, let people know, hey, I got your message. I'm in the hospital. I'm okay. I'm not in any, urgent I mean, it's a serious situation, but it's not a currently a medical emergency. So why don't we chat? And if you're interested in working together, I just need to heal a few weeks or a few months, and my schedule will be coming back to normal. But I love what I do so much that, even the hospital and the what's called Guillain-Barré syndrome, or GBS, could not keep me from speaking to clients and prospects. I actually had another incident where I was on a call with a brand new client, and this had never happened to me before in my life, but my arm went so numb that I had trouble typing. My speech started to slur, and I could no longer spell. And it happened really quickly, and I was able to kind of work out of it almost as quickly as it came, at least in my mind at the time. And I let the client know, hey, I think I just had a medical episode of something that I never had before. I think it might be, and I was correct, a migraine. I'd never had a migraine take that form, but I wound up taking myself to the ER. They, again, did lots of scans, put me on IV, said, hey, you're lucky it wasn't a stroke, it wasn't a seizure, it was a very severe migraine. And I said, well, okay, if it's not a medical emergency, I got to go. I have a presentation to do. They said, excuse me? I said, I've got my laptop with me. Either I'm doing it here or I'm taking it with me. And this is a paid gig, so you can understand the urgency. And so I ran home from the ER, grabbed some hummus and pita bread so I could have a snack. And I was on time for the sound check, and was very happy to do that webinar. And it was for Disability In, which is one of my favorite organizations. And that's how I got my disability-owned business, related to the first incident, not the second. But I let them know, sometimes the show must go on. And yes, I would have had a wonderful excuse to cancel, but you guys are an extension of my family, and I want to do this presentation for you guys today because it was part of the curriculum. And we all had a nice sort of laugh about my escape from the hospital, and my narrow escape from the hospital to be on the public speaking gig. But that's what I needed to do that day. And yes, if it were a true emergency at that point, I would have had to cancel. I'm not saying that you should risk your life for presentations, but there are times that you need to cancel and there are times that you don't. And I decided this was not one of those times to cancel.
One of the best things that I like about you is your, how do I put it, never die kind of a attitude that you have, and that you have not mentioned. So let me mention that. I find that, you're absolutely, you're humorous about things which are very serious, and you present them in such a light note that it does not sound as serious as it should be, taken. So, which is an absolutely stunning attribute that you have, which is fantastic. And this is one of the learnings that I hope your clients are taking with them, because whenever I meet you, that rubs off on me, because I'm a very, very serious looking person, and I think I'm pretty, bogged down sometimes. But I love the way, you make things light and humorous. But with that, let me ask you, how did you start preparing your clients for the pitch? For the
Okay,
pitch
yes.
competitions.
And I'd love to bridge the two thoughts. So first, I don't like taking myself too seriously, right? Work is serious, and speaking can bring a lot of pressure. And so I don't like to take myself too seriously. I like to be lighthearted, but I will say, if it's somebody else that tells me about an issue, I do not take anyone else's issues lightly. But for my own, I take sometimes the liberty to say, if I can laugh at something that could be, a matter that might make you cry, if it's mine, I can be lighthearted about it. And I just think adding humor, a nice dose of humor, if you can, if it's appropriate, it's always good for the soul. And now this brings me to, I encourage, as much as I love helping my clients sound clear, I also encourage them to feel free to be imperfect on purpose. Meaning, if you allow yourself to get out there and really focus on the message that you have, the value that you can give to your audience. You don't have to focus on, oh, I made a mistake, or I was imperfect, or I made, there was a flaw. That's not, people don't get graded like a spelling test when you do public speaking. They get graded on what you gave them, how you made them feel, how you engage them, and all of these types of factors. So I have these principles of giving yourself permission, and the permission has a lot of pers, like personality and persuasion, and a lot of wonderful things that it would be in my framework when I do public speaking. And so the idea of being imperfect on purpose and overcoming something that I call speaker shock, like you get on stage or it's your turn for the Zoom or whatever it is, these negative things may happen to your body and may happen to your choices, and take away from you. And that will segue into what I do for global startups when they are part of pitch competitions. So all of this clarity, confidence, and authenticity moves over into the global pitch. But the global pitch is, again, in one of the vortexes of all things that sort of make me tick. Having people have clear speech, giving non-native speakers access to clear speech that they may not have had prior. So making sure that if a startup from another country comes and does their presentation in English, first, can the evaluators understand them? Second, the PowerPoint deck. If your PowerPoint deck is not clear, if you have, I'm going to call this one errors, as I guess that Microsoft Word would pick up as an issue, right? So if you are putting commas where there are periods for English writing in numbers. So for example, in Europe, you may see a period where there's a comma here and a comma where there's a period here. So here, mathematically, that may seem to someone like an error, right? It's a different style of writing, but the viewer that doesn't know, maybe the viewer doesn't have that knowledge, they might say, oh, that's a typo. They may have the $ on the back instead of on the front. Grammar errors, capitalization errors, things that may not be tragic for understanding the message, but may signal to the investor, this person is not very knowledgeable about business in the US because I can see it, right? Or they may, again, consciously or subconsciously or unconsciously say, something's not right about this presentation. This person's not experienced here. Or they may, an investor in the audience of a pitch competition may struggle to understand the person and say, this would be difficult to work with this person. I'm not gonna vibe there. I'm not gonna be Hivin and Vibin with this person if they're unclear. Or maybe the person is perfectly clear in their English and their PowerPoints are immaculate, but they're not telling their story. And if you don't tell your story to the investors of, what problem are you solving? What is your unique value proposition to solve this problem? And why is your team the one to do it? Like why this problem? Who is your target client? Why you? Why now? Is this, is this company the right company for me to invest in at this moment in time? If your storytelling doesn't convince the investor, that's going to put you at a major disadvantage. And if you're not showing your own personality, investors are humans and they work with other humans. You've got to get the investors to want to choose you. And if you're in a competition and there are judges, and scoring high can get you more visibility, you've got to get a compelling story out there. And there are a lot of components that make you compelling. And again, in the me and the vortex of clear speech, PowerPoint decks that support your message, slide decks, doesn't have to be PowerPoint, but slide decks that support your message. No knock on Google Slides and Canva. They're in there too. And don't have AI write your slides from scratch. It's very visible and it's got too much text on it likely. And even if it doesn't, your viewers will likely know that looks like ChatGPT just drew up your slides yesterday. And then of course the stagecraft and delivery. So if you've got those three things going for you and a clear message, I want to live in that space and I want to help startups get there. So I help the startups by coaching them. Right now I'm working with a group in San Francisco, shout out to the residency, and helping their global startup founders with their English before they even get to the part where we work on their message. Now we're at that stage, and then helping all of their founders, including native speakers, with their with their ultimate delivery on what they call demo day. So some folks call it pitch night, demo day, global pitch competition. But there's another group called NFTE. I was really happy to volunteer for them last year as a judge, and I'm hopefully getting more involved in helping out this year. It's a youth pitch competition. Some of the folks are based here and are native speakers. Some of them are based abroad and are not, or vice versa. But the idea is even youngsters may create a brand and pitch it. And a lot of the judging, whether you like it or not, is based on how that message was delivered, not necessarily the viability of the product that's in there, but it's not the only thing that's in there. So I love to coach the participants. I love to be a judge when asked. I just did that for help judge and give feedback for Disability In, and they have a pitch competition, and emceeing. I love bringing up the energy, giving a pep talk to the founders, emceeing the event. So however I can get involved, I love doing that. Some of it can even be volunteer. And of course, if there's a budget and lots of hours, some hire me for this type of thing. But, I really enjoy seeing founders find their way in their messaging.
What made you start your podcast? Has it started? Have you started your podcast?
So
or
I
are you
launched.
still planning it?
Yes, I'm still planning it. I launched the brand of it. I put the trailer up as a sneak preview. But I was so busy this year with working with new clients, new brands, again, all of my usual areas, the global companies, the athletes, the doctors, in MedMal, and the global pitch competitions. I got so busy. I said, you know what? When I launch this, I want to make sure that I have a continuous lineup of guests. And so I postponed it and hope to launch it by the end of this year. But I'm getting a lot of folks on my guest list of folks who want to share their accent. So it's a podcast of folks sharing their accent with the world. So actors can learn from it, and also non-native speakers in corporate may learn. So the idea is share your accent, and then I can analyze, how do we hack into this accent if you want to get this accent? And then if you have this accent, but it's not serving you for business, so you want to modify it and sound more neutral, I show you how to gain the accent and how to minimize the accent for whatever needs you have. And it's not my place to judge who should use which accent. It's, for actors, you want to make sure that it's a role that, that makes sense for you to play. But for example, I coached one a long time ago. A Nigerian actor said, I'm Nigerian. I'm playing a Nigerian man in a movie, and I grew up with an American accent. Can you help give me my parents' accent? Right? So, it was his lineage, but just not his own accent. I also help people in Spanish. I know a lot of Latino actors that didn't grow up speaking Spanish. I happen to have my double major in Spanish and lived abroad in Spain, and have a lot of friends and students from Mexico, South America, Latin America, and or Central America. And so I know a lot of dialects of Spanish. So sometimes I help Spanish speakers learn to speak Spanish for their role. Whether or not you should take the role or audition for the role, that's on the actor and manager and agent. But when an accent is something they need, I gladly help channel that accent, and specific to the character, not just say, "Oh, you're British," right? That what type of job do you have? What age group are you in? What is your character trying to portray? And we can customize the accent based on that. And then for folks that want to neutralize their accent, and it's an interesting issue because in the age of, having a lot of focus on diversity and equity and inclusion, you want to be mindful that it's not my job to tell somebody you need to change your accent, right? That's not cool. What does happen is folks who find that their accent is a barrier to their success and is a challenge and hurts their confidence, those employees seek out accent work, not because they need to sound exactly like me, but because they want to elevate the level of clarity of their English so that they get the reaction that they want from their audience. So it's interesting when people say, well, why would you tell someone to change the way they speak? I always say, I don't. I help people who ask me to give them skills and a toolkit to allow them to modify their accent in the way that will best help them feel confident, help them in their success. And so it's never a judgment. And this actually thought brings me back to something you asked way earlier in the meeting, which was Spanish. How did Spanish inspire you? That wasn't until my study abroad. My study abroad in college, when I was in Spain, I ended up meeting so many people that were studying English and they just didn't get the chance to practice it with native speakers. And if they did, they just felt that they weren't quite ready to work in English. And so one of my shining moments in my life was I met a woman in a candy shop, friend of a friend. She said, "You speak English? You coach English? Could you please help me pass this test? I've tried to pass this test to get my degree in English 6 years in a row as a senior. This is my 7th try. If I don't pass this time, I'm leaving the school with my tail between my legs, basically, and I'm going to be so embarrassed that I spent all of this time in college and can't get a degree in English." And that's what I studied. And so we worked a handful of times in a coffee shop. I had no copies of her test. I had so no sample tests, no actual tests, no curriculum, nothing. I just asked her, "What do you think was on that test?" And I just distilled in a short period of time. She's not losing the points on reading comprehension. She's not losing the points on writing. It's all about the speaking and dictation when she hears words she doesn't know, all about the sound systems. So I, again, as a college student, just pulled out of thin air what I thought was plaguing her on this test and where I thought we could make quick gains. And we had a lot of fun working together, maybe 3 times, handful of hours in a coffee shop. I left Spain at the end of the semester, went home, got a letter in the mail, "Thank you," and a million exclamation points. Maybe not a million exclamation points, but at least 7 exclamation points. I passed my test, and now I have the confidence to use English. And I was so excited that propelled me. That plus the Cantonese experience as a kid, I'm like, nope, I must work in this field. I don't care if I have a job, if I make money in it, but I'm doing it. This is where I was meant to be. So that's sort of that's some of the inspiration that brought me to be the speech fox.
Lovely. And in fact, you have just answered my last question, and that is, what are your inspirations? And you have just answered that. I think this is a beautiful place to stop the interview now because you have wrapped it up so beautifully that I don't want to spoil the end. This has been a fantastic exchange where you have really shared your experience, how you actually go about coaching, and of course in the most warm and humorous way that you do it. That's your style, that's your signature style, and you do it amazingly well. Thank you so much, Melanie, for being my guest here at Hivin and Vibin with Dr. BB. How do you coach? I just don't know where the time flew. We were just talking and talking and talking.
Well, Dr. BB, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure, Hivin and Vibin with you.
Thank you so much. Bye, Mel.
Bye.